She had nothing but bruises and a dead woman's locket. He had 5 broken children and a heart too tired to keep beating. On a freezing November night, 2 shattered lives collided at a bus stop, and what happened next would save them both. Listen closely, because this is a story about the kind of night that splits your life in two, the before and the after. And for Catherine Miller, that night arrived on the coldest evening in November, when she had absolutely nothing left to lose. She sat at that bus stop like a ghost. No bag. No coat. No phone. Just a woman in a thin sweater and jeans that had seen better days, her arms wrapped around herself trying to hold in whatever warmth her body had left. The November wind cut through the shelter like it had a personal grudge, and Catherine, well, she just sat there and took it. She'd been taking things for so long, what was a little more cold? Her wrists bore the evidence of where she'd been. Purple and yellow bruises, finger-shaped, the kind that tell a story no one wants to hear. She kept pulling her sleeves down, a habit so automatic she didn't even realize she was doing it anymore. In her left hand, clutched so tight her knuckles had gone white, was a silver locket. It had belonged to her mother, and it was the only thing she'd managed to grab when she finally, found the courage to run. 3 days ago, Catherine had been someone else. Someone with an address, a routine, a husband who told her daily that she was nothing. That she was stupid. Worthless. Lucky he even bothered with her. And she believed him, because when you hear something enough times, your brain starts to accept it as fact. That's what abuse does. It rewrites your story until you forget you were ever the author. But 3 days ago, something shifted. Maybe it was the way he raised his hand that night. Maybe it was the look in his eyes that promised this time would be different, worse, final. Or maybe it was just that after 7 years, Catherine's survival instinct finally screamed louder than her fear. She ran. No plan, no money, no destination. Just ran. And now here she was, in a town whose name she didn't even know, waiting for a bus that might not come, to go somewhere that didn't exist. The digital sign above the shelter had been broken for who knows how long, stuck on service delayed, like some kind of cosmic joke. Delayed. Yeah, that pretty much sums up my whole life. Catherine touched the locket, felt the cool metal against her palm. Inside was a picture of her mother, smiling, from before the cancer. Before everything fell apart. Her mom used to tell her, "Baby girl, you're stronger than you think. When the time comes, you'll know what to do." Well, Mama, Catherine thought, staring at the empty road. I ran. Was that the right thing? Because I'm not feeling very strong right now. The cold was getting dangerous now. The kind that seeps into your bones and makes you sleepy when you should stay awake. Catherine's fingers were numb. Her lips felt stiff. She knew, somewhere in the logical part of her brain that hadn't shut down yet, that she needed to find shelter. But where? She had nothing. $23 in her pocket, most of it in coins. No ID, he'd kept all that locked away, another way to trap her. No friends in this town. No family anywhere. Just her and the wind and that stupid locket. That's when she saw the headlights. Terence Bishop was driving home on autopilot, the way you do when you've made the same trip 1,000 times. Work to daycare. Daycare to home. Cook dinner. Help with homework. Break up fights. Bedtime battles. Then collapse on the couch and stare at the wall until your body forces you to sleep. Because actual rest? That's a luxury you gave up the day you became a single father to 5 6-year-olds. 5 quintuplets. When people heard that, they'd whistle and say things like, "Wow, you must have your hands full," or, "I don't know how you do it." And Terence would smile that tired smile and say something like, "You just manage." Because what else was there to say? That he was drowning? That he'd been drowning for 8 months, Ever since cancer took his wife Sarah and left him alone with 5 grieving children who needed more than he had to give? No. You don't say that. You just keep driving. But tonight, something made him glance toward the old bus stop on Miller Street. Maybe it was habit. He used to pick Sarah up there when her car was in the shop. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was God, if you believed in that sort of thing. Whatever it was, he saw her. A woman, sitting in that useless shelter, no coat, shaking so hard he could see it even from the road. His first instinct was to keep driving. Mind your business, Terence. You've got 5 kids at home and a sink full of dishes and a mountain of problems. You can't save everyone. But his foot moved to the brake anyway. Sarah's voice echoed in his head, clear as if she were sitting in the passenger seat. You've got a good heart, Terry. Don't let the world make you hard. He pulled over. Catherine looked up when the minivan stopped, her body tensing with instant fear. Years of conditioning told her, strange car, strange man, danger. Her hand tightened around the locket, ready to run again if she needed to. But the man who stepped out didn't look dangerous. He looked tired. Mid-30s, maybe, with dark circles under his eyes that matched hers. Work shirt untucked. Hair that needed cutting. He held up both hands as he approached, like he was trying to calm a frightened animal. "Hey," he said, his voice careful, gentle. "I don't mean to scare you. It's really cold out here. Are you waiting for someone?" Catherine's voice came out rough. "The bus. The bus doesn't run this route after 8, he said. And it's almost 9:30. She closed her eyes. Of course it didn't. Why would anything be easy? "Look," the man continued, taking a small step closer. "I'm Terence. I live about 10 minutes from here. I've got 5 kids at home, which is why I look like I haven't slept since 2016, and my house is a disaster, but it's warm. I can make you something to eat, give you a safe place to figure out your next step. No strings. No expectations. Just, you shouldn't be out here in the cold." Catherine studied him. Looked at his wedding ring. He was still wearing it, she noticed. Looked at his eyes. Tired but kind. Looked at the minivan with the car seats visible through the window and the stick figure family sticker on the back, though one of the figures had been scraped off. Every survival instinct she'd honed over 7 years told her not to trust anyone, especially not men. But those same instincts had also told her she deserved what her husband did to her, so maybe it was time to stop listening. And besides, she was so cold. So tired. So completely out of options. "Okay," she whispered. The drive was quiet. Terence didn't push conversation, just turned up the heat and kept glancing over to make sure she wasn't about to jump out at a red light. Catherine kept her hand on the door handle anyway, old habits dying hard, but she felt her body slowly beginning to thaw. "I'm Catherine," she finally said. "Nice to meet you, Catherine." He paused. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to. But if you need help, real help, like police or a shelter or anything, I can make some calls." She shook her head quickly. "No police." He didn't press. Just nodded. "Okay." They pulled into a driveway of a modest 2-story house that had clearly seen better days. The porch light was on, and through the windows, Catherine could see movement. Chaos, really. Small figures running. Someone crying. The sound of something crashing. Terence sighed, a sound so deep and weary it made Catherine's chest hurt. "Welcome to the circus," he said, but there was love in his voice underneath the exhaustion. They walked in together, and Catherine's senses were immediately overwhelmed. Toys everywhere. Drawings taped to every wall. A living room that looked like a tornado had made it its personal residence. And 5 children, 5, all about 6 years old, all suddenly frozen and staring at her like she'd just landed from Mars. "Kids," Terence said, setting his keys down. "This is Miss Catherine. She's going to stay with us for a little while. I want you all to be respectful and kind, okay? 5 pairs of eyes. Some curious. Some suspicious. One little girl burst into tears and ran upstairs. A boy with Terence's exact face crossed his arms and glared. We don't need another nanny, the boy said. The last 3 left. You'll leave too. Isaiah, Terence warned, but his voice was tired. Catherine looked at Isaiah, this small, angry, grieving child, and saw herself. Saw someone who'd been hurt and decided the best defense was to hurt first, to push away before you could be abandoned again. I'm not a nanny, Catherine said quietly. I'm just someone who needed help. Like you. Isaiah's glare faltered for just a second. Then he turned and walked away. Terence ran a hand over his face. I'm sorry. It's been hard. Their mother passed away 8 months ago, and we're all just trying to figure out how to keep going. Catherine looked around at the drawings on the walls. Stick figure families with a woman who had long hair and a smile. Crayon hearts. I'm sorry, written in a child's handwriting. And photographs, so many photographs, of a beautiful woman with kind eyes, holding babies, laughing, living. Sarah, Terence said softly, following her gaze. That was her name. Cancer. It happened fast. I'm sorry, Catherine whispered, and she meant it with everything in her. Yeah. Me too. He cleared his throat. Look, I know this is a lot. But I meant what I said, you're safe here. Let me show you the guest room, and I'll make us some food. We can talk more if you want, or not. Whatever you need. As Catherine followed him up the stairs, past more drawings and more memories of a woman who was loved, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Hope, maybe. Or just the dangerous possibility of it. The guest room was small but clean. A bed with a handmade quilt. A dresser. A window that looked out on a backyard where a rusty swing set stood covered in fallen leaves. Bathrooms right across the hall, Terence said. I'll bring you some of Sarah's clothes, if you're comfortable with that. You look about the same size. Catherine nodded, not trusting her voice. He paused in the doorway. Catherine? I don't know what you're running from. But you're not running anymore tonight, okay? Tonight, you're just here. Safe. That's enough. When he left, Catherine sat on the edge of the bed and finally, let herself cry. Not the silent tears she'd learned to cry so her husband wouldn't hear. Not the careful, controlled crying that kept her safe. This was different. Loud, messy, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and painful and true. She cried for the woman she used to be. For the 7 years she lost. For the bruises on her wrists and the fear that still lived in her bones. For her mother who tried to warn her and died before she could help her daughter escape. But somewhere in those tears was something else too. Relief, maybe. The realization that she'd survived. That she was here, in this strange house with this exhausted man and these 5 grieving children, and she was alive. Later, after she'd washed her face and changed into the soft pajamas Terence had left outside her door, Catherine heard sounds from downstairs. Bedtime, apparently. Terence's voice, patient but strained, trying to negotiate with 5 different personalities. No, Caleb, you can't sleep with 17 stuffed animals. There's no room for you. Jasmine, I know you miss Mommy, baby. I miss her too. Marcus, we talked about this. We don't practice karate after 8 p.m. Catherine touched the locket around her neck, then slowly set it on the nightstand. She climbed under the covers of a bed that smelled like lavender detergent in a house full of strangers who were dealing with their own pain, and thought about that boy, Isaiah, and his certain declaration that she would leave. Maybe I will, she thought. Maybe this is just for tonight. But as she drifted off to sleep, warm for the first time in days, safe for the first time in years, a small voice in her head whispered something different. Or maybe, just maybe, this is where the story actually starts. Here's what they don't tell you about healing. It's not a moment. It's not some dramatic sunrise where everything suddenly makes sense. Healing is 1,000 tiny decisions to show up, even when your hands are shaking. Even when every instinct screams at you to run. And for Catherine Miller, Learning to stay was going to be the hardest thing she'd ever done. The first morning, Catherine woke up in a panic. For 3 seconds, she didn't know where she was. Her body went rigid, preparing for danger, her mind racing through escape routes. Then she saw the handmade quilt, the soft morning light through unfamiliar curtains, and remembered Terence. The children. The bus stop. You're safe. Safe. What a strange, fragile word. Downstairs, chaos had already begun. She could hear it through the floor, voices overlapping, someone crying, Terence's patient voice trying to maintain order like a conductor with an orchestra that refused to follow the music. Isaiah, your shoe is not a weapon. Jasmine, we eat breakfast at the table, not under it. Caleb, buddy, we've talked about this. You can't wear your superhero cape to school. It's a safety hazard. Catherine dressed quickly in the clothes Terence had left her, Sarah's clothes. Jeans that fit almost perfectly. A soft green sweater that smelled faintly of lavender. It felt strange, wearing a dead woman's clothing, but also somehow right. Like Sarah was lending her strength from wherever she'd gone. When Catherine came downstairs, the kitchen looked like a breakfast tornado had touched down. 5 children at various stages of eating, arguing, or outright refusing to cooperate. Terence stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with one hand while simultaneously trying to tie a shoe with the other, a feat of parenting that would have been impressive if it wasn't so clearly born of desperation. He looked up when she entered, and the relief on his face was immediate. Oh good, you're awake. Coffee's in the pot. Help yourself. Fair warning, it's strong enough to wake the dead because that's the only way I survive mornings. 5 pairs of eyes turned to stare at her. Catherine felt herself freeze, that familiar instinct to make herself small, invisible, to not take up space or cause problems. But then she remembered Isaiah's words from last night. You'll leave too. Maybe that's what they expected. Maybe that's what everyone expected from her, to disappear, to fail, to prove that she was exactly as worthless as she'd been told she was for 7 years. Good morning, Catherine said quietly, pouring herself coffee. Can I help with anything? You can try to convince Jasmine that yogurt is not a mortal enemy, Terence said, nodding toward a tiny girl with pigtails who was glaring at her breakfast like it had personally offended her. Catherine approached slowly, carefully, the way you approach something wild and easily startled. Hi, Jasmine. I'm Catherine. We met yesterday, kind of. Jasmine didn't look up. Just pushed her yogurt further away. I don't like yogurt either, Catherine said conversationally, sitting down at the table but keeping her distance. Too slimy. Makes me think of eating clouds, but clouds that went bad. The tiniest flicker of interest crossed Jasmine's face. But she still didn't speak. Jasmine hasn't really talked much since Sarah died, Terence said quietly, flipping another pancake. The doctors say it's her way of processing. She'll talk when she's ready. Catherine nodded, not pushing, just sitting there. Being present. It was all she could offer. The boy from last night, Isaiah, watched her with narrowed eyes. Why are you still here? Isaiah, Terence started, but Catherine raised a hand gently. It's okay. She looked at Isaiah directly. Your dad offered me a place to stay for a bit. I didn't have anywhere else to go. So you're homeless? Isaiah. Terence's voice was sharper now, but Catherine just nodded. Yeah, I guess I am. Isaiah seemed surprised by her honesty. He studied her for a long moment, then went back to his cereal, though she could feel him watching her from the corner of his eye. The other 3 children were more curious than hostile. Marcus, who Terence had mentioned practiced karate, demonstrated a kick that nearly knocked over the orange juice. Caleb, quieter than his brothers, drew circles on his napkin with a crayon. And Zoe, the one who'd cried last night, peeked at Catherine from behind her hands like she was playing the world's saddest game of peekaboo. All right, troops, Terence announced, setting plates of pancakes on the table. Eat up. We've got 15 minutes before we need to leave for school, which means we're already running 10 minutes late, but who's counting? The children ate with the chaotic efficiency of small humans who'd learned to fuel up fast. Catherine helped where she could, wiping syrup off faces, finding a missing backpack, untangling Zoe's hair from her jacket zipper. Small things. Simple things. But with each small act, she felt something shifting inside her. Like muscles she'd forgotten she had, slowly remembering how to work. After Terence left with the kids for school, the house fell into an eerie quiet. Catherine stood in the kitchen, surrounded by the wreckage of breakfast, and for the first time in days, felt the weight of her situation settle on her shoulders. She had nothing. No job, no money beyond those $23, no plan. She was living in a stranger's house, wearing a dead woman's clothes, with absolutely no idea what came next. The old Catherine, the one from 3 days ago, would have panicked. Would have spiraled into that dark place where her ex-husband's voice lived, telling her she was useless, that she couldn't survive on her own, that she'd end up crawling back because she was nothing without him. But this Catherine, this new, raw, scared but still breathing version, she looked at the messy kitchen and made a decision. She started cleaning. Not because she had to. Not because anyone demanded it. But because she could. Because choosing to do something, anything, felt like reclaiming a tiny piece of herself. She washed dishes. Wiped counters. Put away toys. Found a broom and swept up the Cheerio graveyard under the table. With each small act, she felt a little more solid. A little more real. When Terence came home around 10, he'd mentioned he worked from home most days as a software developer. He stopped in the doorway and just stared. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I know," Catherine replied. "I wanted to." Something passed between them then. An understanding. This wasn't pity or charity. This was two people trying to survive, helping each other stay afloat. "Listen," Terence said, sitting down at the now clean kitchen table. "I want to be honest with you about something. I need help. Real help. Those kids, they're grieving, they're angry, they're scared, and I'm drowning trying to be everything they need. I've had 3 nannies in 8 months. One lasted 2 weeks. One lasted 5 days. The last one left after Isaiah locked her in the bathroom and Zoe put glue in her coffee." Despite everything, Catherine almost smiled. Glue. Elmer's. The washable kind, so that's something. Terence rubbed his face. "What I'm trying to say is, if you want to stay, if you need a place while you figure things out, you could help me with the kids. Not as a nanny exactly. Just being here. Being another adult who shows up. I can pay you, not much, but something, and you'd have a room, meals, time to get back on your feet." Catherine's first instinct was to say no. To run. Because accepting meant staying, and staying meant getting attached, and attachment meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant pain. She knew that story. She'd lived it. But she also thought about Isaiah's suspicious eyes. About Jasmine's silence. About Caleb's drawings and Marcus's wild energy and Zoe's tears. About 5 children who'd lost their mother and were testing every adult who came into their lives, waiting for the inevitable abandonment. "You'll leave too." "I'll stay," Catherine heard herself say. "For now. We'll see how it goes." Terence's relief was palpable. "Thank you. Really. Thank you." The days that followed were hard in ways Catherine hadn't anticipated. The children tested her constantly. Isaiah especially. He forgot to tell her that Wednesdays were early dismissal, leaving Catherine frantically calling Terence when the kids weren't at school at the usual pickup time. He told her that Jasmine was allergic to peanuts, which sent Catherine into a panic before Terence came home and confirmed it was a lie. Small acts of sabotage, each one designed to prove his point. "You can't handle this. You'll leave like everyone else." Jasmine stayed silent, watching Catherine with those huge brown eyes that seemed to see straight through her. Marcus bounced off the walls with energy that seemed physically impossible for one small body to contain. Zoe cried at random moments, usually when Catherine least expected it. And Caleb. Caleb was the one who surprised her. Drawing seemed sacred somehow, private. It was a Thursday afternoon, about 2 weeks into Catherine's stay. She was helping the kids with homework at the kitchen table, or trying to, while Marcus practiced quiet karate, and Isaiah deliberately gave wrong answers to every math problem just to be difficult. Caleb had been drawing in the corner, something he did constantly. Catherine had learned not to interrupt. His drawings seemed sacred somehow, private. But this time, Caleb came over to her, holding his paper. "Miss Catherine, can you help me?" She looked down at the drawing. It was a family portrait, clearly. 5 stick figure children. A tall stick figure that must be Terence. And a woman, but the face was just scribbles, frustrated marks where he'd erased and redrawn over and over. "I can't remember," Caleb whispered, and his voice cracked in a way that broke Catherine's heart into pieces. "I can't remember what Mommy's face looked like. I try, but it gets more blurry. What if I forget her completely?" Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. She knelt down to Caleb's level, looking at his small, scared face. "Oh, sweetheart. That's one of the hardest things about losing someone we love. The details start to fade, and it feels like we're losing them all over again." "Do you think she's mad at me for forgetting?" "No," Catherine said firmly. "No, baby. She could never be mad at you for something that's not your fault. Your brain is just protecting you in its own way, even though it doesn't feel like protection." Caleb's bottom lip trembled. "But I want to remember." Catherine thought for a moment, then had an idea. What if, instead of trying to draw what she looked like, you draw how she made you feel? What color was her love? What shape was her laugh? What did her hugs feel like? Caleb blinked. I don't know how to draw feelings." "Neither do I," Catherine admitted. "But we could try together. If you want." For the next hour, as the other children migrated away to their various activities, Catherine and Caleb worked on a new kind of portrait. They used warm colors, reds and oranges and yellows, because Caleb said his mom's love felt like sunshine. They drew swirls and spirals because her laugh was spinny and made your tummy tickle. They added a big circle around all the stick figures because her hugs felt like being wrapped in the safest blanket in the world. It wasn't a realistic portrait. It wouldn't help him remember her features. But when they were done, Caleb stared at it with wonder. "That's her," he breathed. "That's really her. Not what she looked like, but her." He threw his arms around Catherine's neck, and she held him while he cried, not sad tears exactly, but something more complicated. Grief and relief and love all mixed together. When Terence came in 20 minutes later, he found them still like that. He didn't say anything, just caught Catherine's eye over Caleb's head and mouthed, "Thank you." That night, after the children were in bed, Terence and Catherine sat in the living room with tea, a ritual they'd fallen into over the past 2 weeks. "What you did with Caleb today," Terence said quietly. "That was... I've been trying to help them remember Sarah, but I didn't know how. I was so focused on keeping her memory alive exactly as it was, I didn't think about letting it transform into something they could hold on to." "I know what it's like to lose someone," Catherine said, touching the locket she still wore. "My mom. Cancer like Sarah. I was 20. And for a long time, I tried so hard to remember everything perfectly that I couldn't remember anything at all. Then I realized, she's not in the details. She's in how she made me feel. In the things she taught me. In the voice I hear in my head when I need courage." "Is that voice what told you to run?" Terence asked gently. "From wherever you were before?" Catherine was quiet for a long moment. She'd been careful not to share too much, still afraid somehow that her ex-husband would find her, that talking about it would make it real again. But Terence had trusted her with his children, with his grief, with his home. Maybe it was time to trust him back. "I was married," she said finally, "for 7 years. And for 7 years, he made me believe I was nothing. That I was lucky he tolerated me. That I couldn't survive without him." She pulled up her sleeve slightly, showing the fading bruises. 3 weeks ago, I realized that not surviving without him would be better than not surviving with him. So I ran. Terence's jaw tightened with anger, not at her, but for her. "I'm sorry. No one deserves that. No one." "I keep waiting to feel brave," Catherine admitted. "But mostly I just feel scared. Like he's going to show up. Like I'm going to wake up and be back there. Like I don't deserve this safety, this kindness, these kids who are starting to trust me. You do deserve it, Terence said firmly. And those kids? They're not starting to trust you. Catherine, they already do. Well, except Isaiah, but he's not trusting anyone right now, including me. But the others? You've done in 2 weeks what 3 nannies couldn't do in 8 months. You've shown up. You've been patient. You've been honest with them about hard things. I'm just doing what I can. That's exactly my point. You think that's nothing, but it's everything. The breakthrough with Isaiah came 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning when Terence had to run to the store for groceries. Isaiah had been in the backyard, throwing rocks at the fence with alarming force. Catherine watched from the kitchen window, recognizing that anger. She'd felt it herself, that helpless rage at a world that takes away the people you love. She grabbed her jacket and went outside. Your dad said to leave me alone, Isaiah said immediately, throwing another rock. Your dad's not here, Catherine replied, sitting on the back steps. And I'm not very good at following instructions anyway. Isaiah threw another rock. I don't need a babysitter. Good. Because I'm terrible at babysitting. I let Caleb eat cookies for breakfast yesterday, and I told Marcus that quiet karate was a real thing, which I'm pretty sure isn't true. Despite himself, Isaiah's mouth twitched. Almost a smile. But then he caught himself and went back to glaring. You're going to leave. Everyone leaves. You're right, Catherine said. Eventually, I probably will. Not because I want to, but because that's how life works. People leave. Sometimes because they want to. Sometimes because they die. Sometimes because staying hurts too much. Isaiah stopped throwing rocks. Turned to look at her, surprised by her honesty. Your mom didn't want to leave, Catherine continued. I never met her, but I can see her everywhere in this house. In those drawings. In how much your dad loved her. In how much you all miss her. She fought to stay, didn't she? Isaiah's eyes filled with tears. She said she'd beat it. She promised. I know. And she tried. But sometimes our bodies break promises our hearts wanted to keep. Catherine paused. I had someone promise me things too. That he'd love me. That he'd take care of me. But his promises were lies from the start. Your mom's weren't. She meant every word. She just ran out of time. It's not fair, Isaiah whispered. No. It's really not. Isaiah sat down on the steps next to her, and for a while they just sat there in silence. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he said, I locked the nanny in the bathroom because she tried to take down Mom's pictures. She said it was time to move on. But I'm not ready to move on. Then don't, Catherine said. Who says you have to? You move forward at your own pace, and if that means keeping every single picture up, then that's what you do. You don't think we should take them down? I think your mom should be everywhere in this house, for as long as you need her to be. Maybe forever. Maybe someday you'll be ready to tuck some away in albums and keep just a few out. But that's your choice. Yours and your dad's and your siblings. Not mine. Not anyone else's. Isaiah leaned against her shoulder, just slightly. You're different from the other ones. The other nannies? Yeah. They tried too hard. They wanted us to like them right away. You just showed up. You don't try to be mom. I could never be your mom, Catherine said. No one could. But maybe, if you want, I could be someone who shows up. Who stays as long as I can. Who loves you guys not instead of her, but because of her, because she made you, and you're worth loving. Isaiah was quiet for a long moment. Then, Jasmine talks, you know. She just doesn't do it around grown-ups. She talks to me at night sometimes. She told me yesterday that she likes how you sing while you cook. Says it sounds like Mom used to sound. Catherine felt her throat tighten. I didn't know I was singing. You do it without noticing. These old songs. Jasmine noticed. When Terence got home an hour later, he found Catherine and Isaiah in the backyard, taking turns throwing rocks at the fence. Not in anger anymore. Just throwing. Being. Terence caught Catherine's eye and smiled, the first real, full smile she'd seen from him since they'd met. Progress, that smile said. We're making progress. A month became 2 months. 2 months became 3. Catherine got a job at a small bookstore downtown, working part-time while the kids were at school. It wasn't much money, but it was her money. She opened a bank account, her first one ever in just her name. She bought herself a winter coat with her first paycheck and cried in the dressing room because it was hers, chosen by her, paid for by her. She was still living with Terence and the kids, but it felt less like charity now and more like family. Chosen family. The complicated kind that doesn't follow traditional rules. Zoe started coming to Catherine when she had nightmares, crawling into the guest room and whispering, "Miss Catherine?" in the dark. Catherine would scoop her up and rock her, singing those old songs that apparently reminded Jasmine of Sarah, until the little girl fell back asleep. Marcus showed Catherine his karate forms with pride, and she learned to be an enthusiastic audience, even when he accidentally kicked a lamp. Caleb drew her into his pictures now, not replacing Sarah, but standing beside the family, a new figure in a different color. Jasmine started leaving little notes for Catherine. Never speaking directly, but communicating through carefully printed words. "I like your singing. Thank you for breakfast. You didn't leave yet." And Isaiah. Isaiah started asking Catherine for help with homework. Started telling her about his day. Started saying, "See you tomorrow at bedtime," like he'd finally accepted that tomorrow would come and she'd still be there. 6 months in, on a quiet Sunday morning while the kids watched cartoons, Terence and Catherine sat at the kitchen table with coffee. It had become their sacred time, these stolen moments of adult conversation before the chaos of the day truly began. "I need to tell you something," Terence said, and Catherine's heart immediately clenched with fear. This was it. He'd found out about her past. Her ex-husband had tracked her down. She'd made some terrible mistake. She'd overstayed her welcome. She needed to leave. "The kids want to know if you'll stay," Terence continued. "Not as the nanny or the helper or the temporary guest. Just as part of the family. If you want that. No pressure. But Caleb asked me last night if we could ask you to stay forever, and when I asked the others, they all agreed. Even Isaiah." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. I'm not." "You're not what?" "I'm not family," she whispered. "I'm just someone who ran away. Someone broken. I don't deserve." "Stop," Terence said gently. "Catherine, look at me. You are not broken. You're healing. There's a difference. And you're not just anything. You're the person who showed up when we needed someone most. You're the person who taught Caleb that memory can be feelings instead of faces. You're the person Zoe calls for when she's scared. You're the person Jasmine trusts enough to leave notes for. You're the person who finally got through to Isaiah." "But I don't have anything to offer," Catherine said. "No money, no. You have yourself. That's everything." Catherine looked down at her hands that no longer bore bruises, that were strong from carrying children and cooking meals and building a life. She touched the locket around her neck, her mother's locket, and thought about what her mom would say if she could see her now. "Baby girl, you're stronger than you think." "Okay," Catherine said. "Okay. Yes. I'll stay." Terence smiled, and it transformed his whole face, erasing years of grief and exhaustion, revealing the man he used to be, the man he was becoming again. "Good. Because honestly, I have no idea how we'd survive without you at this point. You're the only one who can convince Marcus that indoor karate is different from outdoor karate." Catherine laughed. A real laugh, the kind she'd forgotten she could make. "I told him that, and I still don't think it's true." "Yeah, well, he believes you, so we're going with it." That night, after the children were in bed, Catherine stood in her room, no longer the guest room but truly hers now, and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was different from the one who'd sat at that bus stop 6 months ago. Her eyes were clear. Her face had filled out from regular meals. Her shoulders were no longer hunched in anticipation of a blow that would never come. She wasn't the same person who'd been trapped in that marriage. But she wasn't the same person who'd run away either. She was someone new. Someone stronger. Someone who'd learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting where you came from, it means choosing where you're going. She took off the locket, her mother's locket, her talisman, her reminder of who she was before everything went dark, and gently placed it on the shelf beside her bed. Next to it, she put Caleb's feeling portrait of Sarah, which he'd made a copy of for her. "So you know her too," he'd said when he gave it to her. "The locket and the portrait. The past and the present. The mother she'd lost and the family she'd found." Catherine climbed into bed, pulled the handmade quilt up to her chin, and listened to the sounds of the house settling around her. Terence's footsteps as he did one last check on the kids. The heater clicking on. The wind outside, no longer a threat but just weather. She thought about Isaiah's question from that first morning. "Why are you still here?" Because, she realized, somewhere between the bus stop and now, between running away and choosing to stay, she'd discovered something unexpected. She'd come here with nothing but bruises and a locket and a lifetime of being told she was worthless. She'd expected to take up temporary space, to be a burden, to eventually disappoint everyone like she'd been told she always would. Instead, she'd found 5 children who needed exactly the kind of broken but healing love she had to offer. She'd found a man who understood that showing up was 90% of love. She'd found a house full of grief and chaos and sticky fingerprints and joy. She'd found a family. And they'd found her right back. 1 year later. The backyard was full of chaos in the best possible way. 5 7-year-olds running around with sparklers, supervised by a slightly less exhausted Terence. Catherine stood on the back porch, watching, a small smile on her face. It was the anniversary of Sarah's death, but also something else, a celebration of life, of survival, of the family they'd built from broken pieces. Isaiah ran up to her, breathless. "Miss Catherine, watch this." He did a cartwheel, a terrible one, all flailing limbs and no coordination, but he was so proud that Catherine applauded like he'd just won Olympic gold. "Beautiful," she said, and meant it. Jasmine appeared beside her, tugging on her sleeve. And then, miracle of miracles, she spoke, her voice quiet but present. "I'm glad you stayed." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." Later, when the kids were finally in bed after much negotiation and several false alarms, Catherine and Terence sat on the porch steps together, tired but content. "You know what I realized today?" Terence said. "We're going to be okay. All of us. We're actually going to be okay." Catherine looked up at the stars, then down at her hands that had learned to be gentle again, to create instead of just survive. She thought about the woman at the bus stop, so lost and so certain she had nothing to offer the world. She wanted to go back and tell that woman, "Hold on. Just hold on a little longer. Because you're not at the end of your story. You're at the beginning." "Yeah," Catherine said softly, leaning her head on Terence's shoulder in a gesture that had become comfortable, familiar, safe. "Yeah, we really are." And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Catherine believed it. She hadn't just survived. She'd healed. And in healing, she'd learned the most important lesson of all. That family isn't always the one you're born into. Sometimes it's the one you choose. The one you build from broken pieces and brave choices and the simple, radical act of showing up. Sometimes salvation doesn't arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it's just a beat-up minivan stopping on a cold November night. And sometimes that's exactly enough. Remember, you're not broken. You're healing. And that makes all the difference.